Good morning. I'm Gary DeWaal, and this is Bridging the Week for January 27th to 31st, and today is February 3rd, 2020. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission proposed to revise its position limits regime by increasing to 25 from 9 the number of commodity derivative contracts subject to federal limits, to increase the number of enumerated bona fide hedging exemptions, and to expedite the process for persons legitimately requiring non-enumerated hedge exemptions to gain approval. Two commissioners passionately objected to the proposal. Separately, a Futures Commission merchant was fined $650,000 by a panel of the Business Conduct Committee of the Commodity Exchange, Inc. for purportedly mishandling the reporting of positions by a brokerage firm client and responses to the exchange's investigatory inquiries. Groundhog's Day this week in the Northern Hemisphere will supposedly predict whether spring begins early or late. However, no matter how the seasons pan out, I have work to be done. So, let's get started. Over the vehement dissents of two commissioners, the CFTC proposed an overhaul of its speculative position limits regime at a public meeting held on January 30th. Most significantly, the Commission proposed to increase by 16 to 25 the number of physically deliverable commodity derivatives contracts on which it will impose position limits, increase the number of enumerated hedging strategies on which a market participant could rely to avoid the constraints of the limits for bona fide commercial purposes, and introduce an expedited process relying on designated contract markets in the first instance to utilize non-enumerated hedging strategies to also avoid position limits for bona fide commercial reasons. Currently, only 9 reference futures contracts are subject to federal position limits, both in the spot and non-spot months and all months combined. These legacy reference futures contracts are all agriculture-based. Generally, persons holding relevant futures or options on relevant futures contracts cannot exceed, on a futures equivalent basis, speculative position limits established by the CFTC on spot month, non-spot months, and all month positions combined, except for bona fide hedging purposes. According to the Commission, the proposal aims to recognize difference in commodities and commodity derivative contracts, address derivative contracts, quote, that are critical to price discovery and distribution of the underlying commodity, end of quote, to help avoid excessive speculation in the particular contracts having, quote, a particularly acute impact on interstate commerce, end of quote, for that commodity, and rely on the designated contract markets and their expertise and processes to, quote, reduce duplication and inefficiency. In objecting to the Commission's proposal, Commissioner Dan Berkovitz complained that the delegation of the consideration of non-enumerated hedge exemptions to designated contract markets in the first instance would demote the agency from, quote, head coach over the head exemption process to Monday morning quarterback for exchange determinations, end of quote. He also disagreed that the Commission must make a finding that a position limit on particular commodities are, quote unquote, necessary prior to imposing such position limits, and expressed concern that there would be no phase-in to higher spot month limits, quote, by a factor of 2 or more compared to the existing federal or designated contract market limits on the 25 reference contracts. Commissioner Rawson Benham also objected to the agency's application of a necessity standard and deference to designated contract markets. I have a lot more on the CFTC proposal on the Bridging the Week website at www.bridgingtheweek.com. Check it out. And finally, ADM Investor Services agreed to pay a fine of $650,000 to the Commodity Exchange, Inc. related to its alleged mishandling of the account of a brokerage firm client from March 2012 through May 2018. According to a panel of the exchange's Business Conduct Committee, beginning in March 2012, the firm learned that the customer offset positions in its Omnibus account on a first-in, first-out basis. The Business Conduct Committee panel claimed this information was never escalated to the appropriate persons at ADM. Also, beginning February 2017 to at least May 2018, said the panel, at least one ADM employee became aware that, in connection with copper futures, the customer was misreporting position data to the exchange. Following this, ADM provided the client with incorrect guidance and assisted the client in misreporting. As a result, claimed the Business Conduct Committee panel, quote, Admis failed to require the client to provide, quote, accurate reporting information as required under exchange rule. Finally, alleged the panel, after COMEX began a series of investigations regarding ADM's client in September 2017, the client's responses to COMEX's requests were, quote, untimely and inaccurate, end of quote, and that on multiple occasions, ADM passed along audit trail data provided by its client that was not correct. The panel also charged ADM with failure, quote unquote, properly to supervise employees about escalation procedures after one of its employees recognized the client violated exchange rules. With increasing regularity, clearing members are being held responsible by regulators for allowing a client to continue to allegedly violate applicable rules, not taking appropriate actions when on notice of such violations, and or passing along to regulators inaccurate information received from clients. Check out my thoughts on this and further details on the ADM disciplinary action on the Bridging the Week website. Well, that's it for this week's edition of Bridging the Week. As always, there's more information in each article and more articles on the article version of Bridging the Week on the website, www.bridgingtheweek.com. Check it out. I'm Gary DeWaal. Have a nice week. Check out for your shadow on Groundhog's Day. And until the next edition of Bridging the Week, ciao.